Okay, I'm going to hit broadcast.
Good evening, everyone. We are so happy to be together. It's Monday night. We need to get together. It's therapeutic. The world is changing so quickly. When I was a little bit younger, I remember it was probably still on something called As the World Turns, and it was a soap opera, and you followed it. Well, I would suggest we have a very unfortunately dangerous soap opera going on every day with daily activities that scare the heck out of us or confuse us sometimes. And so we're very, very grateful that we've got these Monday night news analysis programs. And tonight, of course, Christine Douglas Williams is joining us. Christine has got a extensive background in just being on camera as well as behind the scenes writing for Jihad Watch and editing, being an editor on Front Page Mag and being an author, etc. So Christine, thank you so much for the energy that you put into these activities, and we really appreciate your being with us, including tonight.
Thank you so much, Dick. It's always a privilege to be here. And as the world turns, you hit the nail on the head. I can only imagine when you look at how you knew the world growing up to how it's become today. And there's something I want to start with, Dick, to just ground at this point. When you look at the history of America, the history of the West, my parents came here in the late 60s. Yes, I'm that old, but when we came here, it was a very different world back in the 60s. For instance, in Canada established something called the Human Rights Commissions, which have become kangaroo courts. And we see an anti-racism industry that has evolved. But what we do not pay attention to is the evolution of Canada, of the United States, into what's called multicultural countries. Now, the US is not multicultural in terms of legally multicultural, but it certainly has a wide range of different people, and they're very welcoming countries. For goodness sakes, we've seen in the States a Black president. There are those that are Black in government, in the Republican camp, in the Democratic camp. So when we see some of what we're looking at today, any reasoned thinking person should ask themselves the question, what is really going on out there? It doesn't really make sense. But what a lot of us don't realize is this has been going on for some time. And this is what I want to deal with today. Now, from my perspective, writing for Jihad Watch virtually on a daily basis and editing for Front Page Magazine and getting tons of emails, I have a good bird's eye view on what's going on out there. And as I was chatting with Mary and Dick before we began, I was mentioning to them the hundreds of stories that are unfolding. You hear them behind the scenes, you see them in the paper, you see them on alternate media. It is a complete bombardment of information. Not only are we being bombarded with information that's coming from the mainstream media, but now the mainstream media is being bombarded with information coming from people's cell phones. That has become a news source. And may I add, an unreliable news source. So today, my focus is going to be, of course, we're going to be dealing with questions on some of these issues, but my main focus is going to be what is going on behind the scenes, the red-green axis. Now, I have to applaud Sharia Crime Stoppers and the entire organization for dealing with the red-green axis for some time now, because that has not ended. The shift has taken place where people are wondering what's going on with the revolution here with Black Lives Matter. There is a sniff of communism there, but people are still asking a lot of questions. But before that, the way was paved. And this is what I want to deal with today, that red-green axis and how it unfolded. Of course, I'll also be mentioning some of the issues going on now, but I want to more get into the analysis of what has happened. Now, I want to draw attention to a couple of cases just to signify how creepy this whole issue has become in terms of deception and violation of rule of law. Okay, so you guys have your issue going on in the States over George Floyd, and it's gone all over, it's gone global. It actually ended up right here in Canada as well with widespread protests. But what many of you may not know is that at the end of May, in fact, right after what happened to George Floyd, a 29-year-old Regis Korchinski Paquette, she is a mix of Black and Native. She fell from a 24-story apartment building in Toronto. And get this, police get the blame. Here's what really happened here. In fact, I'm speculating on one hand, not me personally, but I'll tell you I'll tell you the conversations that are happening out there. There's little information at this point that is accurate because of the ongoing investigations about the fall. And police have been told to be quiet, although there have been some leaks because there is a protocol to follow. But it's given questionable family members, this whole situation of Paquette, a blank slate to write about and discuss their version of how they see what went on. Social media has been going nuts with what the lady that fell, because she died, people are saying in her family, namely her mother and her aunt, that the police pushed her off the building. Now that is quite the accusation, and frankly, it sounds crazy, but here's something to look at. Now, what we do know is that some 5 to 8 officers attended the scene. Now, leaked report from police say that it was actually a knife call. It wasn't a mental health call, because the way the family is making it look like is, look, we called the police for help because we were having issues of mental health issues with our youngster, this 29-year-old girl, and the lady, and then all of a sudden, all we know is that the police came and she's dead. Okay, this is what the public is being told, and much of the media is playing this up. But this was, according to leaked documents, a weapons call. And given the amount of cops that attended the scene, it does imply that it was more than what it seems to be. The family was asked to move back while the cops dealt with the situation. So here's what we do know, that the police went into the apartment, the family stayed back. What happened after that was that she apparently went into the bathroom, silence. All of a sudden, screams were apparently heard, and silence. That's how we know, and it came out, she fell from the building 24 stories and died as a result while she was in the bathroom. Some are saying, well, she tried to actually jump from the balcony, maybe to somebody else's house to escape, and there's the mother saying, and the cousin, that the police pushed her over the balcony. Now, in Toronto, there is a Black police chief who came right out and said, outrageous lies are circulating. But you see now, it's endemic lies. It's become a new norm. So stats are proving, when you look at when you look at the reality on the ground, not just what a small number of people are saying and stoking, stats are proving that thousands of Black lives are being saved by proactive policing. Now, I gave Dick and Mary a graphic just to show you what went up on the police website, to show you the kinds of issues that they have to deal with in a day. I don't know if they may have that ready now. If they don't, it's okay. But on the police website, there was a message on that site that talked about a little child dangling off a balcony. Police arrived, they took care of the individual that was dangling the child that obviously had mental health issues, and the child was saved. This is the kind of a thing that goes on regularly. There are a lot of people's lives that are being saved in horrible circumstances when police go. The bulk of police work involves what's called domestic situations that are going on behind closed doors, situations dealing with mental health that is out of control for families. But we don't see the harrowing jobs that these men and women have to deal with on a daily basis. All of a sudden, they're the ones being targeted as though they are the criminals. Now, over to Minnesota and Seattle, it's sickening what's happening over there. Endless reports surfacing of violence, people losing their livelihoods, getting injured, getting maimed. A lot of them, by the way, are visible minorities who have built businesses. And we're seeing that there's a demographic shift in America. There are a lot of different minorities in America who have made a life. Their lives are being ripped apart. Now, what I'm also seeing in the news is that there's a pattern in some areas of America where a lot of white people in these neighborhoods, or better to do visible minorities, are picking up and leaving these neighborhoods if they can, while many of the police are saying, look, I quit. I don't want to have anything to do with this. Think about if you were out there policing out there and your life was in danger in a circumstance. How will you deal with that kind of a challenge on a daily basis when attacks are coming at you? So looking at a case in Atlanta, this one really interested me. There was an autopsy report released on Rayshard Brooks, he's a Black guy that was shot twice in the back. The report lists now the manner of death as homicide. And DA Paul Howard said that Brooks did not seem to present any kind of threat to anyone. And so the fact is that it would escalate to his death just seems unreasonable, unquote. But if you look at the whole video that was released by Gateway Pundit, you'll see that Brooks was politely coaxed by the officers for nearly half an hour. I watched that video as he lied on about how much he was drinking because he was driving. So he was being questioned about what he was drinking and he kept on lying. He ended up blowing over the limit. Then, as a practice for everyone, whether you're Black or you're white, whatever you are, it doesn't matter. You're drinking and driving, you get taken in, you're gonna get handcuffed, okay? And this is what this guy did, he got handcuffed. And rather than cooperate, all of a sudden, this guy grabs the officer's stun gun. Now, if you know anything about a stun gun, once it's used on a person, they're completely incapacitated. That officer is armed. Losing his stun gun could mean him getting shot with that stun gun, getting incapacitated, his weapon getting taken, and him getting shot as well as his partner. So there was a danger at hand because that stun gun is a weapon. So right now, there's an investigation underway, all while they're already running to call it a homicide, while the DA is saying there was no threat. Yes, there definitely was a threat. But again, we see something that happened here where there was absolutely no justice. The police, again, are getting attacked here. Now, there are some bad apples, I will say, like everywhere, yes. You have cops that are crooked, like everywhere, you have crooked people, and they need to be dealt with. They need training, and they need to be dealt with to the full extent of the law. But to say, all cops are bad, let's go after them, let's watch them under a microscope. It's rather interesting how the anti-racism industry, one of the primary tools they use and the word they like to use is stereotyping. They don't like to stereotype. They say you can't label everybody. But when you look at how they're treating police, this is exactly what they're doing. They're labeling police without any just cause. They're saying police are bad, we need to dismantle them, we need to defund them, and so forth. While many are quitting and there are going to be consequences. There are a lot of hurting people out there who may have had issues in their life with racism. I don't deny that. Or they may have had failures in their lives. They may be angry, but blaming white racism for every woe in America and in the Western world is a big mistake. Now I have a video and I'm wondering if we have that one ready, and it's what Trudeau in Canada did to show solidarity with Black Lives Matter.
One moment, I'll bring it up.
Okay.
Was fired after he rightfully disrespectfully
Yes, Justin!
Perhaps we should tell him about the 7-year-old girl who was beat up at school by an 8-year-old boy who said that she could not play with it because she's Black. Some people are refusing to acknowledge the many reports and statistics, including that of the Ontario Human Rights Commission, which concluded that Black people are more likely to be injured or killed by police officers in certain cities in Canada. And I would say in Canada.
Agis, Trudeau, t'as le pouvoir de changer les choses! Voilà, on a percé,
By the way, Trudeau has lost track of how many times he was in blackface. I don't believe he lost track. He just doesn't want to say it, and he's afraid that any more pictures surface. But you could hear a voice in the back about saying, in fact, about Black people are more likely to be killed. But the reason for that is it's not about race. if it were Jews or Chinese or Indians or whoever committing more high crime than other members of the community, I'm talking stats here, they'd be the ones more likely killed if they're involved in violent crime. People who are involved in violent crime are more likely to be killed by police because they're posing a threat. And that is factual. You can go look up the stats. I'll talk more about that. In fact, right now I'll address it. There's a very interesting article, and it's an excellently done one, by the way. It's on June 5th in the Wall Street Journal article written by Heather McDonald. The title of that article is called "The Myth of Systemic Police Racism," unquote. So here's my little preamble before I get into it. We tend to forget, again, about the progress of Black people all over the country. This is not the 60s, okay? So I can go on with that. Another issue that we tend to forget, when you look at the racism that's going on in countries like China, a couple years back, China had to pull an art exhibit in Wuhan comparing Blacks to animals. In fact, when the virus just broke out, coronavirus, there was a campaign to forcibly test Africans for the coronavirus. They were being ordered to self-isolate, quarantine in designated hotels. Landlords were even evicting African residents, forcing many to sleep on the street, while hotels and shops and restaurants refused African customers. I mean, this is what you call real racism. Not to mention that Black people are still being held slaves in Africa, in Algeria, Mauritania, Sudan, Libya, and in the Arab world. You can find articles, just look it up. Black racism in the Arab world. You'll find many articles there. So, okay, so that is my preamble. Back to McDonald's article. She states that in 2019, police officers fatally shot 1,004 people. Most were armed or dangerous. African Americans were about 25% of those killed by police officers last year, which amounted to 235 deaths, a ratio that has been fairly consistent over the past 5 years. In 2018, African Americans made up about 53% of known homicide offenders in the United States, and they commit about 60% of robberies. But get this, they make up 13% of the population. So you're getting a picture here. In 2008, there were 7,407 Black homicide victims, and the vast majority of those victims were victimized by other Blacks. The police fatally shot 9 unarmed Blacks and 19 unarmed whites in 2019, according to a Washington Post database. Now, those 9 unarmed Blacks represent 0.1% of all African Americans killed in 2019. Let's compare the risk to police. That needs attention. By a police officer is 18.5 times more likely to be killed by a Black male than an unarmed Black male is to be killed by a police officer. There needs to be a police lives matter and all lives matter drive here. The anti-racism industry as a whole has been hijacked by powerful lobbies like Black Lives Matter and the Muslim Brotherhood offshoots. And this is something that we need to talk more about, because those two have managed to converge in what we have been referring to as the red-green axis. Now, I had someone on Facebook identifying himself as a pastor scolding me and saying, you know, there's no evidence that there's some kind of a red-green axis, but the sad thing is there really is. There's a strong link between them. And we would do best as leaders, especially in the church, that if we say we want to lead, to educate people. Some people in leadership have absolutely no knowledge of this. So there's a strong Christian presence in America, and we need to remember now that the moral majority was the one that elected Ronald Reagan. So we do have that strong Christian presence that sadly often gets blamed for supporting Trump. Anyway, moving on here. Then there was an article written in the former UK, in fact, the UK Guardian. It's titled "Unparalleled Privilege: Why White Evangelicals," and that plays to what I was just saying here, see Trump as their savior, unquote. Another dud here, Adam Gabbett wrote that article. He accuses Trump of racism and accuses his Christian supporters, of which Trump has a huge number of Hispanic Christian supporters as well. That's why he launched a huge Evangelical for Trump rollout, which happened in January at the King Jesus International Ministry, believed to be one of the largest Hispanic churches in the country. As reported in a Breitbart article also, John Nolte wrote, and this is really food for thought. He wrote back in February that is, quote, and I'm quoting him here, that as far as the jump in Hispanic support, because that's what was found, a big jump, despite the information that was going on at the time, against Trump and how racist he is and how the Hispanic community, the Black community are against him, there was a jump. So John Nolte writes, as far as the jump in Hispanic support, that is not all surprising to those of us who know everyday Hispanics. He says, my wife is a Mexican immigrant, now citizen. From my experience, legal immigrants, including Hispanics, resent illegal immigrants even more than everyday Americans do. And that's something that everyday Americans often don't understand. There is a resentment. He goes on, why shouldn't they? Legal immigrants followed the rules, went through the trouble to do the things legally. So naturally they resent the idea of line jumpers when they waited in line 10 years. What's more, illegal aliens take jobs and depress the wages of Hispanic Americans, just like they depress the wages of all Americans. While the corrupt media and Democrats want to make illegal immigration about identity politics, according to this poll, Hispanic Americans are not buying it, unquote. These are important voices from the Hispanic community, and lots are also coming from the Black community, but they're being conveniently ignored by the mainstream media, by the worst racist liberals who gain from the likes of groups like Black Lives Matter. So going back to this Gabbett man who writes about privileged white evangelicals, he states that there is a, quote, sustained effort by influential Christian voices to justify Trump's personal misdeeds, and political cruelty, he says, has led to the frequent portrayal of Trump as a flawed vessel of God's will. He points the finger at Trump marrying 3 times, accusations about Trump into porn and assault. Never mind Clinton's misdeeds. Recall Monica Lewinsky right in the White House and subsequently impeached for, quote, high crimes and misdemeanors. Also, what about Veep creep Joe Biden? Not to mention the whole nasty scandal around Jeffrey Epstein. His island was nicknamed Orgy Island. Bill Clinton completely denied even going there when a tech worker on the premises discussed seeing him there, right there on the Netflix series if you happen to watch it. Lots of things have been going on and covered up by the mainstream media, which has become, among major leaders in that circles, the state media of Marxist-minded Democrats. The Media Research Center has found a clear difference between the way the national news media treat Democrats and Republicans showing up, quote, an aggressive effort to defend Democrats of anything. This implies an agenda, a huge agenda. Back to the red-green axis and the alliance between Islam and Marxism, many ask, what do they share? Since the far left likes to parade so-called support of women, we see how women are treated under the Sharia. Of Blacks, we see how Blacks are deemed in Arab countries. Of gays, they kill gays in many Islamic countries and call for their death in their texts. So why the alliance? It's based on a partnership of convenience and the common ground of fascism, and we know this. So moving to what I addressed in my book, in fact, this was my second book, Fired by the Canadian Government for Criticizing Islam, Multicultural Canada, a Weak Link in the Battle Against Islamization. The first part of the book tells about the story of why I got fired by the Trudeau government, because I was a governor and council appointee and was first appointed by the conservative Harper government. So half of that tells the whole story, and the second half, and there are documents revealed in it. And the second half talks a lot about Black Lives Matter and the alliance between stealth jihadists and these kinds of groups, Black Lives Matter, the red-green axis. I discussed the victimhood status quo that enables the expansion of the totalitarian agenda in which big government is actually needed to help people who are unable to help themselves. In this scenario, selling compassion for the so-called perpetually oppressed, this is what we see going on here. Now, this selling is a marketing tool of Marxism whereby experts and government political leaders line their pockets and they rise in power as the self-proclaimed protector of the wretchedly oppressed in our day. Like the poor, recall the caravan ready to break US laws to come in. It's deemed their right to do so. After all, they're poor and suffering. The Blacks, look around you now. It's an invasion of the body snatchers happening. And the Muslims, especially the lobbies who advocate for the Islamophobia subterfuge. In this scenario, there must be a villain. So the group doing the oppressing and this group must be controlled, silenced, or both. This villainous group that we see here are the masters of oppression from the days of colonialism and slavery, and we know who they are. There's no accountability to any other race. It's white people. Make no mistake about it, it's white people. And it's presented as such that their victims, regrettably, remain in shackles. The cycle of bigotry, of low expectation, I call it, continues, and the oppressed remain stunted. Western societies have evolved, and I mentioned that earlier, to become diverse. And when I say diverse, I mean truly diverse. True diversity means we can have any kind of a discussion. We could sit down as adults and talk about issues. So society has that, which it should, but right now it's absent of that. It has diversity of individuals that come from everywhere in the world, but we cannot be diverse and truly discuss issues of diversity. While they parade diversity, they're shutting down diversity to suit themselves. So there is a huge hypocrisy that we see here. This is not to say that racism and intolerance and xenophobia and bigotry don't exist. They do, but they're not exclusive to white people. They're found among other groups of immigrants as well. Yet the biggest oppressors of the Black community have become their own hate-filled leaders who exploit the community. In fact, their communities are rendered unable to escape to a ghettoized existence. So the oppressed Black community has now teamed up with Islamic supremacists, and the two are working toward cultivation of goals to indoctrinate and incite revolution against non-Muslim white society, all the while peace-loving Black and brown people who know and proclaim what these indoctrinators are up to are firmly dismissed as Uncle Toms, as sellouts, or completely ignored. Those who oppose the condescending victimology narrative have also become targets of rage by the profiteers of the anti-racism industry. And this is what I address a lot in that book. And let's talk about Farrakhan for a moment. Okay, these businesses don't care that Farrakhan has actually called for the murder of police. And he did it in the name of righteousness, human rights, justice, and religion, as he invoked the Quran. Farrakhan openly declared, the Nation of Islam leader, and that's how we're looking at how this combines here, quote, "Death is sweeter than to continue to live and bury our children. While white folk give the killer hamburgers, death is sweeter than watching us slaughter each other to the joy of a 400-year-old enemy. Yes, death is sweeter." The Quran teaches persecution is worse than slaughter. Then it says, retaliation is prescribed in matters of the slain. Retaliation is a prescription from God to calm the breast of those whose children have been slain. So, if the federal government will not intercede in our affairs, then we must rise up and kill those who kill us. Stalk them and kill them, Farrakhan says, and let them feel the pain of death that we are feeling. This is all based on lies, according to the numbers, folks. Just look at the stats of who's really killing Blacks in America, and you'll wake up and see reality. Remember the real stats. Now, I also wrote in 2018 that Farrakhan's blatant incitement should have led to his arrest, but the bigotry of low expectations gives him reprieve. Hatred and incitement to violence and murder against Jews and whites that's deemed to be justified have deep implications for the direction of the West in general. That's what I had said back then, and we see it continue today. Had a white person proclaim the violence as Farrakhan did against Blacks and Muslims, that person will be punished, and they should be. Now, here's what the Islamic State leader, Abu Bakr Baghdadi, also once appealed for Black and white men to join hands in unity, he calls it, and so-called equality in the name of Allah. In 2014, he stated, "It is a state," referring to the Islamic State, "where the Arab and non-Arab, the white man and the Black man, the Easterner and the Westerner are all brothers," he said, in an appeal that was aimed at broadening his support base beyond the Middle East, and particularly for the Black community that preach. In fact, the leaders often preach. We're talking like Farrakhan, that they're at odds with white people. So he's trying to say, we have unity here, which we know is a lie based on how Black people are treated in the Arab countries. So he says, Muslims, rush to your state. It is your state. Rush because Syria is not for the Syrians and Iraq is not for the Iraqis. The earth is Allah's, unquote. Fascism is nothing but unity fomented by violence. and resulting in the worst kind of oppression and murders imaginable. History proves it. We see its atrocities globally still, and we ignore it. And when I say fascism, I'm talking about communism historically, and I'm also talking about Islamofascism. So we see the atrocities globally, and we still ignore it. There is no unity. There's only lies toward one agenda. An example between the alliance of Black Lives Matter and Islam in the States. In a speech delivered to the annual Muslim American Society and ICNA, the Islamic Circle of North America convention in December 2015, Nihad Awad, the executive director of CARE, who routinely smears and labels Trump as divisive and insulting to Muslims, he urged Muslim Americans to take up the cause of Black Lives Matter. In 2015, he said, "Black lives is our matter. Black lives is our campaign." Yet another last week, the Muslim Public Affairs Committee in the UK has joined the mobs of Black Lives Matter there and Antifa activists. The group is calling for additional statues in Britain to be torn down. And another extreme example of those few who are tolerated and justified by Black Democratic Rep Maxine Waters. She's one who lives, by the way, in a neighborhood, mind you, where houses are valued upward of $2 million and where her husband collects a pension from the NHL. Waters teamed up with Black Lives Matter protesters outside the Capitol in July 2016 in response to the shooting of two Blacks. Let me see who they were here. Terrence Crutcher and Keith Lamont Scott. It was a protest that disgraced the legacy of Martin Luther King's peaceful vision of unity in the civil rights movement. The demonstration compared modern day America under Black president then, Barack Obama, to the dark days of Black oppression that necessitated the civil rights movement. Waters shouted, quote, "I am sick of this SH," and she said it, "and I'm not going to take it anymore." After Waters finished her crowd-rousing tirade, the demonstrators chanted as they marched back to the White House, "Hands up, don't shoot. No justice, no peace. Hey, hey, ho, ho. These racist cops have got to go." So that was back then. The Black Lives Matter movement is not a peace-loving, pro-Black movement that Martin Luther King envisioned. He is a very different character than what we see stemming out of Black Lives Matter. It's a divisive, violence-promoting movement and a network of well-funded socialist, communist organizations that have been agitating America for decades. Now, this is the information according to Capital Research Center about the foundations of Black Lives Matter. They began in 2013 with the Twitter hashtag Black Lives Matter, after neighborhood watchman George Zimmerman, called a white Hispanic, by the way, in the press, was acquitted in the killing of Black teen Trayvon Martin. Radical leftist activists Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, and Opal Tometi claim credit for the slogan and the hashtag. Then following the Michael Brown shooting in summer 2014, Dream Defenders, an organization co-founded by the Acorn affiliated Working Family Party activist and Occupy Wall Street organizer Nalini Stamp, popularized the phrase, "Hands up, don't shoot," which has since become a Black Lives Matter slogan. Another now has become, "I can't breathe." Note, the former Communist Party USA vice presidential candidate Angela Davis sits on the Dream Defenders Advisory Board. The Canadian co-founder, by the way, of Black Lives Matter, Yusra Kogali, tweeted, "Please, Allah, give me strength to not cuss, kill these men and white folks out here today. PLZ, PLZ, PLZ," unquote. Like the Al-Quds incitement rallies, Black Lives Matter, which has escalated to worse in that they are tearing up the place and causing injury, they get a pass because of the exploitation of victimhood. They work like raptors together. If you've seen Jurassic Park, you'll appreciate that meaning between Black Lives Matter and what we see here with Islamic supremacists. So moving along, on a radio show with Alexandria, with OAC, the radio host said, "What's going on with Israel and Palestine, while it's very, very deep, it's very, very criminal, and it is very, very unjust," he says, to which Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I'm always AOC, I'll call her, she shoots back. Absolutely. And then she added, I think too, where we're at as a country when it comes to Israel, Palestine is very much a generational issue. No, it's not. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, by the way, and Rashida Tlaib both belong to the Democratic Socialists of America group, and both support the jihadist Palestinian cause. From the river, Jordan, to the sea, Mediterranean, Palestine will be free. It's a declaration of the goal to obliterate Israel from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, as written in the Palestinian Authority Charter, in the Hamas Charter, the Fatah Charter, and the manifesto of the PLO has in it that its mission, it was formulated, that organization PLO, for the quote, liquidation of Israel. Bernie Sanders, by the way, is also a self-described democratic socialist. So socialism, when you look at it, at what it promises, it presents itself as enticing. Government will take care of everything for you. Free stuff. Good people, though, don't want that. They pride themselves on hard work, not stealing, not handouts, not hand-ups. So you have these organized democratic socialists and Muslim Brotherhood linked organizations working their agenda in an organized fashion, while the foot soldiers of jihad and Black Lives Matter are driving their agendas in violence in a disorganized revolutionary method. So they work together, and you see how that is working for them when you look at their strategy on the ground and their organization. The Muslim Brotherhood linked organizations have been paving the way for victimology for years. It's how they expanded the stealth jihad. It's how they expanded the vision of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation to drop its seed worldwide that Islamophobia, AKA criticism of Islam, must be quelched. There's an entire Islamophobia observatory that the Organization of Islamic Cooperation has dedicated itself to for years. Meanwhile, the victimology soil is now ready, fertile, and in comes the revolutionary Black Lives Matter. So we see it kind of working together in the past and continuing between the organized and the disorganized, where the Muslim Brotherhood strategists have paved and continue to pave the way. This needs to be remembered. Anyone is accepted to fight the cause. If you're a murderous person with mental health issues and you're a Muslim and you kill in the name of Islam, well, you become a heroic martyr that has achieved the highest calling in Islam. And it's tolerated because the jihadist is deemed a victim of colonialism of white people. Never mind 1,400 years of jihad. Similarly with Black Lives Matter, violence welcome. Criminals of the worst kind get lauded for a cause and even worshipped. People bowing, that image of Trudeau, can't get it out of my mind. It's sickening, it's idolatry, it's just, it doesn't help anyone. And this guy is the leader of Canada, a so-called free country. So the Black Lives Matter group, when you really look at them, and you really look at the numbers, and you really look internationally as to what's happening to Black people, including in America, even in the Caribbean, you realize they really don't care about Black on Black crime, the genocide in Africa against Blacks, the crime, the inner cities that go on in the Caribbean, the village wars that go on in Africa. They don't care about Black lives. What they care about is race wars, and they are stoking it. And it's being done. And just like jihad is being done in the name of Islam, and this is normative Islam, they're committing violence, and this is being stoked by the communist-minded at the highest level who are stoking it, the Democrats, the liberals that see themselves as the holy ones, when really they want to keep the status quo, and they are stoking that violence. And what they're doing in the process is that they're undermining democracy, not just undermining it, dismantling it. You have all seen historically the images of jihadists ruining statues, just destroying history. We're seeing this happen right before our eyes in a country that is supposed to be the bastions, countries of the rule of law, like America, like we're seeing it in the UK, even in Canada. We have towns now that people are looking at renaming because it's named after some colonialist. I mean, it's never ending. We're seeing a reshaping, we're seeing vandalism, and nothing is being challenged the way it should be. So this is serious, what we see going on here. It is the culmination of years of the red-green axis now on the ground level, creating anarchy, because that is how fascist regimes take over. So here's the mandate on the Black Lives Matter website. Quote, "We dismantle the patriarchal practice that requires mothers to work double shifts so they can mother in private even as they participate in public justice work. We disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure requirement by supporting each other as extended families and villages. We foster a queer affirming network. When we gather, we do so with the intention of freeing ourselves from the tight grip of heteronormative thinking," unquote. One of the conservative contenders of the leadership in Canada, Jamaican heritage, Leslie Lewis, referred to this, and I applaud her for doing so. She actually referred to that mandate, and she had a few words against it because that is obviously not something she supports. In fact, she condemned it, and I do applaud her for standing up against the chaos, against the crime and disruption of rule of law. She's a politician that's now proclaiming truth, and she's an accomplished member of the Black community. I actually had someone tell me, when you read the whole Black Lives Matter mandate, it looks different. So in other words, what this person is actually declaring is that you package a bomb in candy and balloon and kites like the Palestinians have done in Gaza. It's okay. No, it's not. Doesn't matter how you package it. Nothing from that statement that was just read from the Black Lives Matter website there's nothing in that to be applauded. It should be obvious that Black Lives Matter was contrary to Martin Luther King's ideals, which proclaims unity and embraces all of life. And one of his statements, Martin Luther King strongly condemned violence. This is what he said, and we see it happening today. "Man was born into barbarism when killing his fellow man was a normal condition of existence. He became endowed with a conscience, and he has now reached the day when violence toward one another, human being, must become as abhorrent as eating another's flesh." What a disgrace Black Lives Matter is to peace, what a disgrace to Martin Luther King, what a disgrace to true diversity, what a disgrace to every freedom-loving society, and shame on everybody who has taken part of this dangerous, violent organization. So another example I've used in my second book, Fired by the Government of Canada for Criticizing Islam, I discussed that the alliance between the so-called oppressed group, the Islamic Jihad cause, and the socialist left could also be seen when, I'm going back again to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, when she became an instant Democratic Party star by unseating Party Caucus Chair Representative Joe Crowley in the New York primary in June 2018. Cortez is staunchly anti-Israel, and she justifies Palestinian terrorism. She accuses Israel of massacring innocent Palestinians during the Gaza demonstrations after Trump moved the American embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. Israeli forces had in fact shown restraint, incredible restraint, in carefully targeting jihadist terrorists to avoid hitting the many human shields used by Hamas at the border fence. All the while, Hamas was setting fire to Israeli fields and launching attacks. The victims of the massacre that Ocasio-Cortez made a stir about turned out to be 84% Hamas operatives. It's reminiscent of that picture that was taken, that photo op, with the when she posed in front of all these so-called caged people of the caravan in front of this fence, and it was determined after that there was really nobody behind that fence. It was all staged. So she's making stories up as she goes. 85% were Hamas operatives and the rest were human shields that Israel did everything to avoid. Another point I stated 2 years ago, I said, quote, "No matter what America or the West does in terms of correcting its past wrongs, and I hold to this today, such as slavery and colonialism, it will always be deemed collectively guilty of racism by the likes of Black Lives Matter and the likes of socialism that stokes it. Americans and Westerners have not been able to fathom the hatred against them by the likes of Black Lives Matter, now working with Antifa and the Muslim Brotherhood. Such agenda-driven groups, in fact, notoriously exploit, as we know, the victimology narrative, even drawing in innocence in their negative incantations. I'm not saying that everybody who partakes in this is, well, they're guilty in the sense of they should have this moral sense that violence is wrong, but many of them actually believe that they're being victimized, and they have not gone out there to examine the numbers of what's really going on in the Black community. So going back again to Maxine Waters, Just after the White House press secretary at the time, Sarah Sanders, was asked to leave a restaurant in Lexington, Virginia, because of her work on Donald Trump's behalf, and this was a couple of years back, Waters publicly incited abuse against the Trump team. She stated, quote, "It's appalling. Let's make sure we show up wherever we have to show up. And if you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd and you push back on them and you tell them they're not welcome anymore, anywhere. We've got to get the children connected to their parents," unquote. Again, look at the neighborhood she's living with, that I mentioned, she's living in, that I mentioned before. And we need to also understand that the stokers of this, the Democrats, the socialists, they always live in the highest echelon, and they take full advantage of what capitalism offers, but they use those that they feel they can manipulate successfully on the bottom, and they keep them there because they don't want them to succeed. They want to use them like beasts on the ground level to stoke revolution and do their dirty work for them. This is what's really going on. In a similar matter, but worse in some ways, University of California professor Hatem Bazian, co-founder of the Anti-Israel Students for Palestine, for Justice in Palestine, he issued an open call some years ago for intifada on the United States, and he got away with it. Again, completely ignoring what this man was calling for, inciting violence, and it gets ignored. So here also is what the Nation of Islam promotes against the Jewish people. This was actually written in a published statement of theirs. Quote, "Jews have been conclusively linked to the greatest criminal endeavor ever undertaken against an entire race of people, the Black African Holocaust. The effects of this unspeakable tragedy are still being felt among the peoples of the world at this very hour," unquote. Jews need to stop supporting this in the name of social justice. Everyone needs to. It has nothing to do with social justice. It is rooted in communism, in hate, and in propaganda. Today's anti-racism industry often serves a divisive cornerstone with the underlying message that it's high time that white colonialist oppressors went to the back of the bus and lived in guilt and shame because of the past sins of their ancestors. It doesn't matter about the apologies. It doesn't matter about the evolutions, about the commissions, about opening the doors, about the programs. It doesn't matter. All that matters is it's our turn. You guys go to the back of the bus, and they're doing it in violence. Only white people can be racist, and only whites can hate and discriminate against Blacks because Blacks are too oppressed, too wounded a century and a half later. The low expectation of this perpetually damaged segment of society is insulting and denigrating to the Black community and relegates them to a lesser class. In this model of modern anti-racism, white people will always carry the whip and chains. The Black people will always be the victim. People tend to forget that America has grown. It is no longer where it was. Dennis Prager, in fact, wrote an excellent piece, if you guys could look it up. It's titled "The Four Horsemen of America's Apocalypse." And in short, it's victimhood. He explains every one: demonization, which is of whites now, a cause to believe in, and lies. Now, that's bringing us close to the end of my major conversation about what's going on with Black Lives Matter. But I want to bring up your attention to some of the articles that I've covered on Jihad Watch, because it's very easy in times like these to forget that jihadists, stealth and violent, they never stop. They stoke. They continue their work. And this is something that must not be forgotten. The West is being targeted from all sides. We can't forget this. Now, what came in the news recently was very important, that France killed a Muslim leader who called for a gentler, kinder Al-Qaeda to establish Sharia law in Africa. Now, I wrote about this. This guy, his name is Abdul Malik Drukdal. He played a critical role in the global jihad. His mission extended way beyond the Al-Qaeda Maghreb, in the Islamic Maghreb. He was seen to be, well, fine, an Al-Qaeda leader in the Islamic Maghreb gets killed. Well, there you go. But this guy was highly influential, and this needs to be understood, in the global expansion of the Sharia. His mission, in fact, was in line with that of the Islamic State, which is now actually a growing and powerful force in the Sahel region of Africa after being dismantled in Syria and in Iraq. So here's an example of the kinds of information that's very important to understand about this Islamic leader. He called for, he wrote a document, and the document was highly sophisticated. I cover it in my book, my first book, The Challenge of Modernizing Islam. He wrote a confidential letter to the emir of the Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. Now, what he talked about was the deep strategic fracture between the Al-Qaeda and the Islamic Maghreb leadership and its lieutenants on the ground, and he saw military intervention as inevitable. But the letter did demonstrate a formidable commitment and a worrisome plan for the future. What he was trying to portray the jihad, Al-Qaeda, in a light that is more resembling the Muslim Brotherhood. He talked about foreign policies. He talked about, quote, adopting mature and moderate rhetoric that reassesses and calms. To do so, he said, you must avoid any statements that are provocative to neighboring countries and avoid repeated threats. Better for you to be silent and pretend to be a domestic movement than that has its own causes and concerns. And he goes on to explain in detail, like a chameleon, how you infiltrate every society from inside the government outward to general society. Now, this very much was what you would call a global plan, just like we see for North America, the Muslim Brotherhood plan for North America. This was the influence for this particular Al-Qaeda leader. So now that he's dead, that is a major, major blow for Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. And who knows how that will translate on the ground, as these groups have been fractured on one side, but actually working together, since ISIS is now working in that region to expand, all, of course, in the name of Allah. So moving along here to the next point. Russian air forces have unleashed a powerful attack against anti-Assad jihadists bordering Turkey. The key point, according to the Hoover Institute report, Russia's loyalty to Syria is solely about gaining regional influence. A lot of people say, okay, fine, we have, Russia has allied itself just like every other country is doing, allying with one or another, but Russia is playing a really deadly game here. This is what the Hoover Institute writes, that foreign ministers have no value for the leadership in Moscow except as a means to an end, and that Putin's pose as the Islamic world's best friend, quote, is no more than a pose, and a hypocritical one at that. It goes on to say he has no preference about the kind of Islam he finds among his Muslim allies and clients. Iran's Khomeini is a Shia, Syria's Assad, an Alawite, Turkey's Erdogan, a Sunni. Russian foreign policy is aimed predominantly at reducing the American impact in those parts of Europe and the Middle East. So this is really the goal that we see with Russia here. Now, I want you to weigh something here with a Lenin quote. Lenin, the founder of the first communist state, here's what he said: we will encircle the last bastion of capitalism, the United States of America. We will not need to fight. It will fall as a ripe fruit into our hands. And we must practice coexistence with other nations until we are strong enough to take over by means of world revolution. We are not pacifists. Conflict is inevitable. Great political questions can be solved only through violence. It is inconceivable that communism and capitalism could exist side by side. Inevitably, one must perish. More to watch out for in brief. 20,000 illegal Muslim migrants poised to set out from North Africa to Italy. So you're seeing a bombardment still continuing to undermine democracy. More deceit. Swedish government accused of boosting overall test scores by removing results from migrants, making it look as though, and selling it to the Swedish public, that the vast influx of Muslim migrants that are coming, oh, hey, they're doing just as well as everybody else, and they're going to be productive members of society. Never mind the jihad, never mind the failing scores. They were actually being told to remove those scores from the results overall. Next item, French Navy escorts 167 more migrants into British waters. 1,830 migrants have come into the UK in 2020 so far. That continues. We've been writing about it on Jihad Watch. It's worth looking up because Nigel Farage is a guy that's following this. This is a scandal taking place in the UK. And yes, a big question is, why is Boris Johnson not doing anything about it? I addressed it last time here, but it continues. Iran's Ayatollah Khamenei rejoices in the riots. That's the next item. By Allah's favor and grace, he says, the US has been disgraced, unquote. Turkey, China, Russia, also celebrating lawlessness in America. They're all fascists, hating the democratic way of life. In Germany, the top intelligence agency in Germany, the Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution, has written what is being called its most comprehensive analysis of rising anti-Semitism by Islamic supremacists. Anti-Semitism is rampant among Islamic organizations in Germany, while government authorities have been instructing the incidents of Islamic anti-Semitism be registered as right-wing. Okay, so I'm going to stop actually because I'm pretty much up on my time, and we're going to have Mary or Dick come back in and deal with some of your questions.
Well, Christine, I
That's
think
quite abrupt.
that's fine. That's fine. Well, great to have Mary back as well. I just want to thank you for reminding everybody that the world does turn. And while we're focused on many of the things that you spoke about in the beginning, when you broaden the view to Italy, Germany, Africa, Sweden, we realize that the world is turning, and in many cases in the opposite direction. We can also think about every one of those cases that you mentioned and think about the fact that so many of those people all over the world are anti-Trump. Iran, Erdogan, etc., Russia, and so on. And Trump is basically the target of all of this unrest in the world. And if Trump could just be moved out somehow, these people that you mentioned outside the United States, they would continue to move towards their agenda. So thank you for reminding us about all those other things happening around the world.
Dick, if you connect the dots about what's going on around the world, it's all under that banner of the red-green axis. We see what's happening in Europe with the flood, the open flood of migrants. We're not saying all Muslims are jihadists, no. But we know that they have infiltrated the refugee stream. And in America, where Trump has been diligent and careful about borders, all of a sudden, it's been stoked by globalists on the inside. This whole globalist ambition is very Marxist at the core, and it's very united. But you see, it's working together with Islamic supremacists. So while in Europe, it's being done through immigration to dismantle democracy, it's now being done on American soil through the same victimology, just in a different form with Black Lives Matter.
Well, and I think the other observation to be made really is, there wasn't supposed to be a Trump. This was supposed to be a 4-year period after Obama. And so the things that are happening around the world, these are all people who would have loved to have a third term for Obama, or would love to see Joe Biden, perhaps with a vice president named Obama, like Michelle or somebody, but I mean, just as an image. That is the red-green globalist axis. That is what was supposed to continue and pick up speed, except for Donald Trump. And so from the very beginning, the need to get rid of Donald Trump has been the #1 priority for all of these red-green axis globalist people around the world. And they've tried everything, and they are, in fact, very successful at manipulating in a genius kind of a way, a worldwide symphony to just take shots at Trump in every way they can. This business of kneeling, just like you, it makes some of us nauseous to see the kneelers. We have a whole bunch of appeasers. We have a bunch of kneelers, and it's really, really widespread. So we have Trudeau. I'm glad you focused on that, and Mary played the video. But look at the Democratic leadership with Pelosi kneeling in a regimented kneeling. Look at the corporations that are sending large amounts of money to Black Lives Matter, which is a way of kneeling. Just look at, if you go to some websites or you watch TV programs now, there are people who are virtue signaling, and before they get to their message, their product, they want you to know that they support Black Lives Matter. They actually have the equivalent of signs before you get to their content, and they're trying to sell you something. They want you to know that they are a Black Lives Matter supporter. The other side of that coin is, and I thought this was interesting, one of the observations just to throw out there is the money associated with supporting Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter is collecting millions of dollars. People are sending them money to get, theoretically, to get protesters and violent rioters out of jail, but bond money. You have major corporations committing large sums of money to Black Lives Matter. Now that's either extortion money, so you'll stay out of my Walmart or whatever, but it's also a function of where does all the money go? Black Lives Matter is not a charity. And I read an article today, Christine, that said that apparently Black Lives Matter funnels the money it collects, which is large quantities, to an organization called Act Blue. Act Blue is actually the equivalent of a PAC that puts money into the pockets of many, many Democrats. So you actually can think of Black Lives Matter as an intimidating organization that collects money, and much of that money goes into the Democratic campaigns that are happening all over the country today, including the presidential campaign. So I just want to bring that.
Yes, and I mentioned earlier on about the establishment of Black Lives Matter and the Democratic influence, as well as the socialist influence and the various organizations that are part of that. So this is all part of the Marxist globalist vision. So the money that we see going into Black Lives Matter, many are saying, okay, it's going into combating racism, but no, it's going into something far more sinister. It's not, and I'm not saying in fact, combating racism is good, but what I'm talking about here when I say sinister, it's far more sinister than demonizing police is bad enough, but this is going into a global cause to disrupt democracy and to change the way the democratic societies work. It is parading itself as anti-racist, as loving toward your colored brothers and sisters, but it doesn't really care about Black people. When you look at the facts out there, which I presented today, there is a globalist Marxist urgency about it. And this is where the money is going, because it is developing that in government and so forth.
Well, the other comment before we throw it over to Mary, I know we've got questions, Mary. Let me go one more item. I'm sorry, but one more item. The whole notion of defund police, that is the actual demand. And when you think about what defund police means, you can go back to the anti-police movements with Bill Ayers, who was associated with attempts to blow up police buildings and something to do with shooting a policeman. So you have this ongoing demand. We could have just simply said, instead of defund police, we could have said, prosecute that bad policeman. We could have said, defund him, take his pension away. Instead, it's defund police, really meaning defund law and order. It means
anarchy. Anarchy.
Right. So the whole point of this is anarchy, and for people to kneel and to be useful idiots enough. And I'm talking about pastors. I'm talking about Democratic city councilmen. We're talking about, heads of universities. We're talking about people who run school boards, to kneel and not understand what you're doing. You're kneeling to anarchy. Maybe you're kneeling because you're afraid. I'm not really sure. And as a summary of that, if enough people kneel, if enough people are afraid of violence, then they'll vote for Joe Biden, because the only person who can guarantee that he can turn off the violence is the man that leads the party behind it. In other words, Joe can, in fact, turn it off. Donald would have to take action. There might be violence, there might not be, but since you've made a brilliant case, Christine, that the Black Lives globalist group is behind this, and their tactic is violence. If you want to get rid of the violence, you have to collapse to their agenda, which would mean
it should terrify people.
Right.
Terrify people. What would happen if a socialist government, the Democrats have become more and more socialist, if they win, this should terrify people.
Sure.
When you look historically at the Iran deal, at the alliances that were made under Barack Obama, when we see the kinds of forces that the Democrats support, including the violent Black Lives Matter, my goodness, basically you're looking at a Marxist takeover. This is what should terrify people more. What you're seeing now, it's there. It's not being caused because Trump did anything wrong. It's being caused because of what this group stands for. It's there on their website, and it's there for anybody to go out and search what their roots are. And their fruits is that of violence. I still am puzzled, how people out there, knowing what Martin Luther King stood for, could actually support a group like Black Lives Matter. Something is very amiss.
They are not educated, Christine. That's basic picture. Is
But
they,
even conscience, as Martin Luther King said, what about conscience?
right.
Where are the people's conscience? What about a peaceful Black person out there that's saying, okay, how could you be peaceful and support Black Lives Matter? I don't get it. I don't get it.
I've been
How could you
seeing
bow to it? Something is wrong with people's mentality out there, not even taking the time to research this group, to pay attention to the lives that are being destroyed, especially visible minorities, and put two and two together.
I've been seeing a lot of minorities, a lot of blacks standing up against Black Lives
Yes.
Matters to the point that there was actually a march through DC this past weekend in support of law enforcement. And they literally, there's a picture, I think on Breitbart, of a black man holding a sign saying, I support the law enforcement, the police. But where do you see it in the media? Where we're running into trouble is that the voices that need to be strong and standing against this are nowhere in the media, because the media will not put it up there. But if it's Black Lives Matters, Antifa, boy, they are all over every station out there. They're getting the news, they're getting the money, they're getting the fame. But if you have a black person who's standing up against it and wants to stand for the law enforcement, wants to ask BLM, where's BLM in terms of the inner city and what they can do to put programs in for the children, for the parents, for the families that are broken, for the criminals that can turn their lives around? Where's BLM in all of this? They're not doing a thing.
And that should raise a lot of red flags.
Right.
You know, Mary, this may be the time that America is finally waking up. The red green axis has been discussed for a long time.
Right.
This is something that I am thinking that maybe people would wake up and say, what is really going on here? What is really wrong with the media? Am I really comfortable with this? Because according to approval ratings, Trump has gone up, way up among the Black community. We
Yeah.
know his support with the Hispanic community, despite what the mainstream media is saying. In fact, the mainstream media is starting to look more like the Iranian media and what you would see in China and North Korea.
Yep.
Blatant lies.
Yep.
And all we have to do is go back to the election when Hillary Clinton was sure she would win, where the media was saying with 90 to 95% certainty that she would definitely win. And no, Donald Trump won. The media has been lying, blatantly lying, like media that we see in these propagandist media that we see in these fascist regimes. This is what the media has become. It is no longer representing the people. It is no longer representing the truth. It is nothing but a handmaiden of globalists. This is what it is doing. And people are paying into them to do this.
Let me just say the one thing I saw today, which I thought was interesting. They only had it for a short time, but the Atlanta mayor was addressing the city, and Fox News had it on. Then they changed over to Trump. Well, before they left her, she said that she was talking about how the policing rules and regulations that were under Obama and Biden. Now, I don't know if she was saying that in terms of them handing down what those rules and regulations were, or if it was just the era of Biden and Obama, that she was living those rules and regulations that came down. So after she said that, I thought, my God, here she is ruling under Biden and Obama when they've been gone for, almost 4 years. So why didn't she make some changes? Why isn't she realizing what's going on? And the police chief who stepped down almost instantly, none of them have any guts to stand up and say, look, here's what we're going to do. Here's how it's going to play out. Here's what we're going to, how we're going to manage the situation that we've been handed. Instead, she's just out of the picture.
That's right. Now, I don't know if we want to go there, but I know there are a lot of people saying, why hasn't Trump called out the military police? But when you look at what's coming up next, which is the elections, when you look at short-term gain versus the long term, this man is not in an easy position.
No, he's not.
First was the Russian collusion scam.
Yep.
Then we saw this farce that God knows how much it cost the American public of an impeachment hearing and trial, which was completely bogus, and anybody could see it that opened their eyes and looked. Then came coronavirus that somehow ended up, well, there seems to be, I've got to show you guys. I should have sent you this, Mary, but now that I didn't, I'm just going to hold it up on my iPhone because you've got to see this. It's supposed to be for humor, only it's not funny. But if you can you see it there, Mary?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we can see it, but we need you to read it. Let us see the
Okay.
picture. Maybe you can read it.
Okay, I'll read
Here's
it
the
to
picture.
you. Okay, so you
All
see
right.
it. There's a Twilight Zone guy, and here's what
Right.
he said.
That's the
Imagine
guy.
a virus so intelligent that it knows how to vanish during riots for its own safety. Okay, so we see what happened right after, on the heels of the impeachment hearings, came the coronavirus. And now, when Trump's supposed to be campaigning, we see riots everywhere.
Right.
It seems to be a big ploy to stop the process, because after all, everybody knows the problem with Joe Biden. He's mentally incompetent, and I do not say that lightly. He has said things where I have seen interviews, I have seen commentary. How cruel could people be to have this man out there, sometimes just not knowing what's what? He even forgot the name of God in one particular interview. The man is he's not himself. He has issues, but he cannot afford to go out there and campaign with Trump or have debates with Trump. So there seems to be a concerted effort right from the start to stymie and stop Trump every step of the way, call him every name in the book without evidence, and to malign that man and to go after him with such a ferocity that what we're seeing now is, it actually plays right along to what we were seeing right from the start of the Russian collusion. So they just kept on progressing, and they'll keep going. And right now, they'll probably come up next and say, well, look, due to Trump campaigning, never mind what happened with these riots, coronavirus has increased again. Everybody in lockdown. So therefore, we have to go by mail. And then they'll attempt to try to steal the elections through a mailing process.
Oh, and
Bad prediction, but that's where it's headed.
And I read today that the contact tracers that all of these states have hired are not going to be asking anybody who tests positive for COVID whether or not they were out in the protests. That's not going to be part of the questions. It's like, excuse me, they're going to ask for everything possible from you and I, but they're not going to find out if you contacted it by way of protesting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we've got a really good question here from one
Okay.
of our attendees. I'd like to get to that if we could. I know we're kind of going along on this, but it's a very good discussion. Can Islam be protected in America as a religion and be defeated at the same time?
I would say yes. And this is something that I have addressed quite often, actually. Islam needs to be seen, if it's going to be allowed into a democratic country, if you want to practice your religion in peace, because many choose to do it, even though they may be regarded as apostates in their country, that's their business. When you are on American soil, you practice it in peace. Islam is a religion. It is not supreme. It is not supremacist. Well, we're not tolerating its supremacism on our soil. So if you want any special favors, if you want to be declaring you're offended because you're criticized, sorry, folks. You are no better than Christians, than Hindus, than Jews, or anybody. Suck it up like everybody else. If we had drawn the line in the sand according to our constitutions, Mary, we would not have this problem.
Right.
I have likened it to, if I know there's a maximum security prison filled with sex offenders, let's say, and I decide to release these people into a small village community, what do you expect to happen? Are you going to blame them? Of course, they're beasts, but who are you going to blame more? The people who let them in. We have leaders who have escorted Islamic supremacists in, gave them no boundaries, allowed them to proliferate, felt sorry for them, allowed them to run rings around us through this victimology subterfuge that's coming right down from the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Had we simply followed our own constitution and respect religious rights and freedoms, they would not have achieved what they've achieved.
Yeah, agreed. Well, you know, one of the things I keep thinking about is defunding police. Really and truly, what you need is more money to get the police trained, and maybe that's a training issue that we need to think about. I heard Sean Hannity talking yesterday or today that said, really what we need to do is think about how we train them in terms of self-defense, and maybe some of that would be very beneficial in how they operate in the public. But
Yeah.
we need a force beyond belief that will stand for the law enforcement, stand alongside of them, stand in front of them, and show their support. I thank them every day. Every time I see an officer, I will thank him for his service. I try to reach over and shake his hand, but I know I'm not supposed to do that right now. But, you know, we need a movement. I'm calling for everybody to stand up.
Police lives matter.
Well, I also think as an individual, we also need to think about personally fortifying the police. Part of that is supporting them. Part of that, I think we started talking last week at our program, is getting to know them, getting to know the sheriff, and identifying ourselves as a person who really values what they do. And oh, by the way, I happen to have a carry permit. I happen to be legally armed, and I'm here. If you have a problem and you need me, I'm certainly would be happy to be deputized. For some people, that sounds like an extreme position. I guess all I'm getting at, if we're going to end up defunding the police, if we're going to have fewer police, the police are going to walk off.
They already are.
It's already
we're
happening.
not going to have leadership sheriffs or leadership. We certainly aren't going to have leadership governors. Obviously, the president has time to recapture his law and order position. We'll let that happen. But individually, I think people need to start to prepare themselves. If they want safe communities, they're going to have to, quote, fortify the police with support and, frankly, perhaps with their own physical presence, so they can make sure that their family is protected and that they don't have this ridiculous situations where people are giving away territory within the sovereign country. So we have this crazy situation where we have a zone, and obviously people know today there were attempts to create other zones in Asheville and Nashville and other places today, and there will be more, where somehow in an Alice in Wonderland world where these people will barricade themselves into their own new world order zone. Meanwhile, those same people want us to have no borders as a country. So we're really, really upside down. I think people need to start taking individual responsibility for safety and security and for their own freedom. And
We
that's
need
a
to start
great way
putting our vote in the right place, from community politics, when you look at the local level politics, right up to the federal. For instance, this problem with policing didn't start overnight. Police are very much governed by the political system. You have a police force, you have the mayor, you have the councillors, they all mix together and they're all accountable, and it goes right up the chain from the poor guy at the front line getting all the abuse, right up the chain to the politicians who are leading this. For example, the RCMP in Canada, some years ago, I think that was in 2011, arrests were made during Ramadan. 3 arrests of guys that were planning to blow up a place that was on terrorism charges. Would you believe the RCMP ended up, the top brass, ended up apologizing for making arrests during Ramadan? And when they had meetings, they made sure, took off their shoes in the meeting, when they collaborated with the local Muslim community, didn't eat that day, and apologize to the community. And now we see another incident that happened some days ago, actually. Many may not be aware about it. That First Nation chief, Alan Adam, out west in Alberta, there was some kind of an altercation there. Police was seen punching him, and and it looked very violent. But again, you only saw a part of a video. We don't know what he did before. But Justin Trudeau comes along and says, oh, the video, that violence against our First Nations chief is shocking. This is the kind of a thing we have going on. And you're looking at politicians, Dick, stoking this.
Absolutely.
The police don't have a hope if the politicians are stoking it, because they end up being accountable to them. And there needs to be a system in place from all of us that supports rule of law.
I think rule of law is something that we all need to just stand up and shout. We have to have it. I think there was basically people in the past. I'll give it back to the Obama administration.
Yes.
They set rules of engagement domestically and in the Middle East. So you have military leaders who are now complaining about Obama, who, when they were in charge in the Middle East, had crazy rules of engagement. They wanted to make sure that somehow the American soldier was more accepted by the community. They actually did community organizing of the Marines in Afghanistan, told them how to carry the Quran, how to not offend people, etc., as opposed to doing their job, which in the military was to win a war, and in America is to enforce the law. So to use a government agency, including the FBI, for sensitivity training and support for civil rights and civil liberties is a perversion of what their job is. And we have that all over the place. And Donald Trump is suffering because so many of the people who are still in his administration come from the administration prior, where all of this, including out of space, was supposed to make it somehow make outer space somehow be friendly to the Muslim community. I mean, it was basically a perversion of just basic law and order or military victory to put in these rules of engagement that were all social engineering. Social engineering, if you want to say that, that could be Marxist social engineering.
Very much. This is what's happening here, social engineering.
Right. And I think that's a carryover. I think we have people in local government who are still functioning that way. We have churches
Very
that
much.
have social
Very
justice.
much.
And the victims are people that you've mentioned. I think the Black community is a victim of this law and order. And you mentioned, I thought, courageously, Jews. Synagogues are being vandalized in the name of Black Lives Matter. So Jews in America have to be very, very nervous if anybody wants to defund the police. When you take law and order out of a country, one of the communities that's very, very negatively impacted are Jews. It's just the way it works.
Dick, I saw a video. It was heartbreaking with a Jewish fellow. Apparently, he was in a car of some sort, a vehicle, and he was. I wish I could have shared it, and I would have, but this was on Messenger, so I couldn't share it otherwise. But this fellow was warning the Jews of New York City to get out while you still can. What a lot of people don't realize is that attacks by the Black community against Jews have been going on far longer than the appearance of this latest round of Black Lives Matter. There was a lot of attack on Jews. A lot of people are aware of the anti-Semitic attacks and stabbings and attacks and random attacks, in fact, on innocents and name calling and so on. But a lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it was being done by Blacks in New York City. And it wasn't mentioned. Their identity was being covered up, much the same as we saw in Britain when the identities of these Pakistani men with the Muslim raid gangs, calling them Asian grooming gangs, their identity was also being covered up. So the Jews, given what's going on with the Nation of Islam, this is not going to be pretty. They're going to be facing a lot of lashback and a lot of violence as a result of what we see, because already there was a problem with crime in the Black community. We see the numbers. We're not being racist by saying what is. But now that we've emboldened the worst elements of this of that community, and I'm not talking the honorable ones. We have a lot of Blacks that are successful and they hate what's going on. But now that we've emboldened the most violent elements of the Black community that are the foot soldiers of Marxism, the Jews are going to have problems because the Nation of Islam puts the blame on the Jews for what they call, which is so offensive, a Black Holocaust. Unbelievable that this could be reported.
It's chilling, and it really is. And we go back to the day-to-day happenings of things that just are incredible. And those of us that remember a different world, we can't believe what we're seeing. Mary, do we have a few more questions, or are we running out of?
I think that's it for tonight.
Yeah. Well, Christine, we're so glad that you cover what you cover and that you share what you share. I'm going to do just a couple of announcements and then invite you to give us a closing comment. These programs, and again, we really appreciate people being with us throughout them, and we are really, really happy to see the growth in the YouTube Live community. Thank you so much for that as well as our loyal Zoom people. We keep going. We're really, really fortunate. Christine will be back on July the 6th, and we're looking to continue throughout the summer, but we can definitely say July the 6th, Christine will be back. We always say this, but it's true. I wonder what will happen between now and July the 6th. There is an important day coming up called July the 4th, Independence Day. Hopefully it will be a peaceful environment, but we'll welcome Christine back. In the meantime, Claire Lopez will be with us on Monday, the 22nd. Leo Holman will be with us on the 29th. And for those of you that haven't been to the Sharia Crime Stoppers YouTube channel, you can go there and see all of these recordings as well. On the 25th, we'll have a Thursday with Dr. Mark Christian. Again, his news analysis is always very interesting and frankly, very different. He is a Christian convert and an ex-Muslim imam, so we look forward to that as always. Just want to mention that we're happy to publicize other webinars that are really, really important. Alex Newman is going to be talking about Behind the Deep State in great detail. We've had Alex on before. That will be on the 28th of Sunday at 7:30. That is not one of our webinars. It's the Red Green Axis Exposed organization. You do need to Google them, and you do need to register specifically for that one-time webinar, but we wanted to bring that to your attention. And then frankly, Christine, I want to thank you for covering all the news about the world and Islam. It keeps going on. Another source I just want to bring to people's attention, Jihad Watch is fantastic. Robert Spencer, Christine, and others. There's another program, another summary comes out weekly, which is just chilling. And that's at globalfaith.org. You can contact them and you can get an email with really, really terrible news articles about all the things that are happening around the world with Islam. So we just want to mention, put your seatbelt on, think about fortifying your police. And with that, Christine, do you have a final comment?
My only comment is to appeal out there to the moral majority. There was a moral majority once that put Reagan in the White House. We need to appeal now to our good senses, not to be barbaric the way, like beasts, the way Martin Luther King stated. Keep the vision on what's good, what's righteous, and realize when something doesn't feel right or doesn't seem right, it isn't right. So never underestimate what one voice can do. Call your politicians, do anything you could do. Use what little or large sphere of influence you have. We cannot afford to lose our democracies because we are losing them fast at this rate. They're still retrievable. I have a lot of faith in America still.
Well, we love that you do, and we love the fact that Canada has been a friendly nation. We're very, very much concerned about Canada, and thank you for helping us bridge that gap. Mary, a final word?
Yeah, I would also mention that we are interacting with a team that is putting together the Muslim Oath Project. And so we would like you to go out and check out the United West website, and you will see our videos as well as on YouTube on the Sharia Crime Stoppers YouTube page. Muslim Oath Project. Pardon me, my throat wants to go out. But yeah, you're going to find it very interesting in terms of how to vet your candidates.
And Mary, I want to thank you, Mary, putting that up. By the way, one of the comments that gets my attention on the Muslim Oath Project, which you can see there at the United West Sharia Crime Stoppers page. Right, Mary? Is that where it is?
Yes.
Okay. But when you look at that, you're going to see a reference to another page where the hundreds of people running today, now, in summer primaries and the general election in the fall, the number of Muslim candidates is terrifying. Just look at that list and understand what the Muslim Oath Project is all about. You're going to be getting a series of webinars, a series of videos to prepare you to go to meetings and ask really challenging questions of incumbents and people running for office about how they can support the Constitution and Sharia at the same time, as well as dealing with their deceptive answers. So it's really an important point, and I'm glad you mentioned that, Mary.
And the last thing I would say is please thank a law enforcement officer every time you come across one, because of what they stand for and how they are they run to trouble where you run away. So I thank them every day, every time I run into one.
Great point, Mary. Thank you. Thank you very much, Christine. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you here next week on a Monday night. Thank you very much. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.